All right, welcome to another episode. Today we have a special guest, actually one of my favorite people that I follow online. I've been following him for many years now. Most likely you've heard his name if you're anywhere on social media and you're following anyone who's in extreme sports or military and that kind of thing. If you watch anything online that's TV related to the Special Forces community, then you've most likely heard of Dean Stott. He is formerly a British Special Forces commando basically a tier one soldier in the SBS. We just had an episode with the SAS, Australian SAS. So we're going to hear a little bit different spin on these amazing warriors. Dean, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. Why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, and talk to us a little bit about the SBS and why is that different than the SAS? Or how is that different?
Yeah, there's a lot of differences and there's actually a lot of synergies. So and my background is slightly unique going into the SBS. So the SBS is the Special Boat Service, which is the Navy Special Forces of UK. Everyone's heard of the sister unit, the Special Air Service, the SAS, which is the Army. The big difference really is, well, primarily before I joined, you could only be in the Royal Marines to join the Special Boat Service. To go to the SAS, you could be Royal Marines, Parachute Regiment, Army, Air Force, or whatever. But they soon realized that they were losing a lot of potential candidates to the SAS, especially Marines that were going over there because they didn't like the diving. So they then opened up tri-service for the SBS as well, which then opened the doors for people like myself from the Army to go in. Unlike, for example, other Tier 1 Special Forces units that we know, like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. Delta Force equivalent is the SAS, SEAL Team 6 equivalent is the SBS. But although they have their own selection process, the SBS and SAS people aren't aware of is actually joint. It's exactly the same one. So there isn't one that's different or more difficult than the other. So it's part of UK Special Forces selection. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as I touched on, going from the Army, being one of the first candidates, I brought a lot of attention to myself on that course. They tell you to be the grey man on selection. Exactly. The grey man. Don't bring any attention to yourself, either for good or bad reasons. Sure. On a 6-month course, I was the grey man for about 2 minutes. The first day we were on parade, sat on our Bergens in the car park. Yeah. My name got called out and I had to stand up and they're like, why are you going SBS? And I was like, here we go. So for me, my reasons for going SBS, I spent 8 years in Tier 2 Special Forces with the Commando Reconnaissance Forces. I was an instructor on the All Arms Commando course. So I'd worked alongside these Royal Marines pretty much from the point of joining the military. And I was also the senior diving instructor at the Defence Diving School. So I was very comfortable being underwater. So the SBS...
So you already had that under your belt before you even tried out for the SBS then?
Yeah, I already had that. I was a diving supervisor.
Cheater.
I was a diving, yeah. The diving we have is very different in the engineering to the SBS.
Sure.
But my thought process was, if I go SAS, because of my diving background, there's 4 troops within the SAS. It's, air, mountain, boat, and mobility. And I thought, because of my diving background, I'm going to end up in boat troop. And I thought, well, SBS, they're all divers. So at least if I go there, we're on a level playing field. And then I have the options to potentially go in air, mobility, or mountain. Mm-hmm. But that was totally the opposite. Actually, when I went to SBS, I then realized actually they're not divers until they actually do their pass selection and go on their SF dive course. And so you literally, with your background, literally have more experience than them. And so I still ended up in boat troop anyway. But at the time, we had 2 conflicts going on. We had the Iraq and we had Afghanistan.
Can you tell us the years that you were talking about here?
Yeah, so I did selection. I passed selection in 2000, end of 2006. Mm-hmm. So you had Iraq, which was SAS were primarily running. And this was the height of the Afghan war now, and the SBS were running there. So two theaters, two different units. So, for me, it was great because we were going out to Afghanistan. And then as the Iraq war started tapering off, then SAS would then come over. But actually, for the busy years within Afghanistan, it was literally SBS which were running the whole of the operations.
Wow. So you guys really got to be right in the golden years, so to speak, of the Afghan war, from my understanding, just reading up on different units, military and U.S. military and British military. So that's really the height of, or the peak of the Afghan war, I understand, right?
Yeah, I think it was the busiest time. I remember reading somewhere, I think it was the busiest time in UK and US Special Forces history, because you still had Iraq going on, and you then had Afghanistan. And then you also had the piracy crisis on the east coast of Africa. So there was all these hostage situations popping up as well. So, it was the busiest time. And I always remember a good friend of mine, Clint Emerson. I don't know if you heard of him.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course.
Him. Yeah, I remember him saying to me, that our peers before us, they were literally hoping to go on one operation. That one operation in their period when it was quiet, that one operation they were waiting for, we were doing every night. We were literally going out the door every night. I was very fortunate. I did a short period of time before I got injured, but I was very fortunate to do the first ever operational jump for the SBS, which was in Afghanistan. I did the first ever operational jump for the black roll for UK Special Forces. I was literally ticking a lot of boxes in a short period of time, which sort of tells you about that sort of era.
Sure. Which, so for the people who don't understand, when you're saying the operational jump, you're basically talking about parachuting into an area, which is very rare, right? Because I think a lot of people think from watching the movies, because they're all showing you the hey-ho and all that stuff, the oxygen mask, cool guy, Mission Impossible, whatever, right? And you're just like, oh my God, these guys are, this is so cool, right? They do it all the time. I'm like, I know in our military, it's super rare. And I imagine it's the same for you guys as well.
It is. It's a rare one,
right? Like in active duty, not, you train on it all the time, but as far as operation, it's super rare.
Well, as I touched on with the air, the mountain, the boat, and mobility, you have so many insertion skills that you have to train. So your commander has them as options. So a lot of the missions may not suit the air option. And so it has to really fit, but you have to at least all be trained in it, which is where you see all the people doing the halo and the hey-ho. Yeah. That should you need it or be called upon it, you guys are current and up to date and can use it. So we were very fortunate. That was, and we did. That wasn't the first one on that tour. We did a few on that tour. It bode in our favor because of the success of it, that we could use it on future operations.
All right, so let's talk about how you grew up. We're gonna back up a little bit. Yeah. So, to my understanding, you grew up in a military family, but you were not going to pursue a military career, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of led you to do the military?
Yeah, my father was my grandparents are in the military. My father was in the military. As you touched on, I was born into that sort of military environment. My father, from a military standpoint, he was in the Royal Engineers, which is why I ended up joining the Royal Engineers myself. But I always say that he was the Ted Lasso of the Army. He was the Army football manager, player, and coach. So what we would call a tracksuit soldier. His career was based around his sporting abilities. Yeah. And now I've watched Ted Lasso. He's nothing like my dad at all. My dad's a bit more. But I always wanted to be, I was immersed in that environment. I grew up in a town called Aldershot, which Aldershot is the home of the British Army. Mm-hmm. It's where the parachute regiment were based back in the 80s and the 90s and the noughties, actually. And so I'd never even heard of the SBS. Never even heard of the Royal Marines because it's like almost it's the rivals of the parachute regiment. It was either SAS and parachute regiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my school playground. We had the balloon. So P Company, which is the parachute regiment's selection process, is in and around where I went to school. I mean, you had this static balloon where the guys do their first ever parachuting jump, and then our school had a long strip. It's like it must have been about 10 soccer pitches length, but it was actually the runway for the Red Devils, which is the Army freefall skydiving team. So literally every day I would see these guys jumping out of the sky, and guys were in uniforms. There was military equipment everywhere, but it wasn't something that sort of stood out to me that I wanted to do. I actually always wanted to be a fireman.
Mm-hmm.
My father finished his career, did 22 years, and we sort of left Aldershot and moved it out into the country. And so I sort of left that military environment. And my last 4 years in secondary school were in the country in a very much civilian environment. And so sort of any sort of visions of the military sort of drifted away at that point. But I went to college, and I didn't really like college, and I loved surfing. I've been surfing since a young boy, and I went on a surfing holiday for 2 weeks, which then turned into 6 months. And my father found me working in a surf shop and told me that I, wasted my career and what was I going to do? I was age 17 at this point, and so
surf bum,
proper surf bum. Yeah. I didn't really, and my reasons for that, I still wanted to be a fireman, but back in 1993 there was a big recession. And so Surrey, which is the county where I lived, there was 2,000 applicants for one job in the fire brigade, because, everyone was screaming out for work. And there was so many people qualified for that. So a young 17-year-old, I had to be 18 anyway, so I didn't even hit the age threshold. So I thought, how am I going to best build up my resume, my CV, that when I then become a fireman, it's going to help me. And so I thought, well, the military is great for that. I can get the discipline, I can get the fitness. And there's a lot of ex-military that transition into law enforcement, fire, and emergency services anyway. So that was my thought process. And to silence my father, I told him I joined the military. And unfortunately, the response I got wasn't what I was expecting. He told me I'd last 2 minutes. In hindsight, maybe reverse psychology. But it gave me that fire in the belly to sort of prove him wrong.
Epic. So Surrey's up in Wales.
Sorry?
Is that in Wales?
What's that?
Surrey.
No, Surrey's not. Surrey's actually south of London.
Okay. Isn't there a Surrey, Wales?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm almost positive that I've been to a place, drove through Surrey, Wales, and I always remembered it because I always thought it was funny because, Surrey, like, interesting.
Surrey. Yeah, it probably is up there. No, Surrey is a county. So it's a whole, it's like a district, what they say. Yeah. So it's south of London. So I'm still in England, and I'm not Welsh.
Excuse me. And,
no. I go to Wales later because that's where we do our selection process.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And also in the Scottish mountains, I understand you do some training as well. Or is that just the SAS?
We do some training in there. Sometimes they do the SEER course, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Extractions, done up in Scotland. And we actually, once we pass selection in the SBS, we go and do our SF boat and dive course. And some of our boat courses are actually up in Scotland as well.
Yeah, I've just seen some footage of that, and I'm like, dude, that looks miserable. I don't know. Oh. It's like... I think the closest thing we have is the Golan Heights here, that would come anywhere near that, which is where I got my misery training.
Cold, it's cold and wet, and it runs through you. I was in Park City for Thanksgiving with the family, and it's like snow on the ground, and we've been to Jackson Hole and Montana and Bozeman, and they're like, well, you're used to this, because my wife's from Scotland, so we used to live in Aberdeen in Scotland. I said, yeah, but this is a nice dry cold. When you've got that wet cold, and it's miserable. It goes straight to the bones.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's lots of places like that here where I used to live up in the north. And so, not fun. Not fun winters, but, it makes for cooler summers for the Middle East.
Yeah.
So when you grew up, did you ever run into any kind of bullying or anything like that kind of might have helped how do you say, make the makeup of being a warrior, defender? Like, was there any turning point for you where, because I think for a lot of guys that end
Yeah.
up in combat, there's that big moment where you realize it's that fight or flight that you're kind of forced to encounter in life.
Yeah, it builds up that resilience before you've
Yeah.
even started the military. Yeah, there was a couple of occasions actually. It was so we sort of skipped over it. My father and my mother split up when I was aged 8 years old actually,
Mm.
and my mother was from Manchester,
Hmm.
and she took me and my sisters. Unbeknownst to us, we didn't really know what was going on in the morning. I was 8 years old, and there'd been a big fight the night before with my mum and dad. I remember being quiet through the house, having to walk through the living room and
Mm.
seeing blood on the wall and some teeth in my dad's teeth in the fire. He had some false teeth anyway. And
Holy
when we got to
moly.
Manchester, where my mum's from,
Yeah.
to get on the housing, to get a house or a council house, you had to be homeless. So we ended up living in a homeless shelter in Moss Side in Manchester. And Moss Side, for anyone who knows UK, especially
Mm.
Manchester, was the roughest area in the whole of UK in the mid-'80s. There was massive riots. Me and my sisters were the only Caucasian kids in the school. So you can imagine the attention I was getting at the age of 8. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
straight away I was fighting. I was fighting in the playground every day. I actually got kicked out of that school. I don't know if it was because I was fighting or more safety for us, and we ended up going to another school in Fallowfield.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, I now guest speak for Manchester United Foundation and go back to UK, and the kids that come in are from Moss Side and Fallowfield, where I grew up. But my
Epic.
father, during this period, my father would travel every other weekend from Aldershot in Surrey all the way up to Manchester, about 240 miles, collectors and takers back. And that was a bit of respite for me. It was nice to be around my dad. We'd do some great fun things, but I wasn't fighting as much as I did back then.
Mm.
And then my father got custody of me and my sisters, and we sort of moved away from that environment. So that was my initial sort of element of bullying or fighting as a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one was just purely by accident with my dad. We still lived in Aldershot at this time, and I was going from junior school to secondary school. And a lot of my friends, I went to Talavera School in Aldershot, which is very military. And a lot of my friends went to Connaught, which was another military heavy school. But my dad didn't want me doing that. He was almost now transitioning to get out of the military. So he sent me to Wavell School, which was another one slightly out of town.
Mm.
But of course, we all had short hair. My dad was the sergeant major at Gibraltar Barracks. So, he wouldn't go pay for me to get a haircut. He would send me on camp, this training camp, and I would just get grade 2 clippers over. So it was very obvious that I was what we call a pads brat, a military child.
Yeah.
And day 1 of secondary school, I don't know why to this day he did it. He probably thought it was a smart idea. It was all about, we had a uniform. He got me a blazer. He got me a briefcase as my school bag. And I don't know if you've ever seen the In-Betweeners. It's about these 4 nerdy kids who get bullied at school. It was pretty much like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so straight away, these kids were onto me. Because I had a military dad, and also because I looked like something an extra out of In-Betweeners.
Yeah.
So I ended up fighting.
Bully magnet.
I ended up getting suspended from that school as well about 2 weeks later. My dad's like, "Why are we fighting?" I was like, "Well, why'd you dress me up like this?"
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, when I said that he moved from Aldershot, we moved to Surrey.
Mm.
That was it then. All that sort of troubles in the past stayed in the past. It was almost like a fresh start. I was a civilian child now. My dad was, left the military. And there was no trouble then from then on. But they were the earlier stages in my life.
It's funny because that really reminds me of the way I grew up in northern Israel. I was like the only white kid in the whole of the town, right? The only American. We were known as the American family. And so I always joke, because people talk about white privilege. I'm like, yeah, I'll tell you all about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I know what white privilege is all about,
Yeah.
I got my butt handed to me on the daily. And so I know for me, that was definitely a pivotal moment from being bullied at school. And I wasn't a violent kid, so I just would take the beating like an idiot every time. But it was like that switch in my head turned on of like, hey, if they're kicking my butt And
Yeah.
if I hit them back, worst case scenario, I just get my butt kicked again,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
like so liberating because it's like, holy crap, I can defend myself. And the dudes were getting their butts handed to them every time. They kept getting bigger and bigger because they're just like sending, because the way it works in the Middle East, it's like this whole like family kind of environment. So it's like my cousin, my this, and my bigger, relative, whatever. And it definitely was a turning point for me, and I can totally relate with that. That's epic. I wouldn't expect that for someone growing up in England, um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. No. No. Yeah. It's
that's
Moss
awesome.
Side was a rougher area.
So let's go back to your military career. So you passed through selection, you joined the SBS. Um, what kind of stuff were you doing that was different what you were doing before? And was your previous military experience like a how you call it, trampoline, if you will, like building up towards what the missions you were doing there?
Yeah, so obviously I'd come from a commando reconnaissance background anyway, and so it was the natural stepping stone to go special forces. But like sort of going back slightly, when I joined the military, like I said, I still had visions of just doing 3 years and becoming a fireman.
Hmm.
I joined the Royal Engineers. My father was Royal Engineers, and so he was like, get a trade from the military. That's where my mindset was at the beginning. And I was about 60. What was I, about 7 kilos and about 5'7" at the time when I was 17 and a half. So I was a young, skinny kid.
67
Yeah,
kilos.
I was still skinny. But then
Wow.
within 18 months, I then
Yeah.
got to 90 kilos and 5'11". I literally grew
Wow.
physically, but also grew mentally. I did
Yeah.
basic training, I did well in basic training, and then did the next course. I didn't really look at command tier 2 special forces and tier 1 special forces. I just took a course at a time.
Hmm.
But each time I went on the course, as I said, physically I was growing, but mentally I was getting stronger. And I soon realized actually, I wasn't just in the top 25% of the group. I was either number 1 or 2 top student. And so that's when things started, then, all right, let's do this, then let's do that. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
in the engineers, I was probably like a Cub Scout. I had a diving badge, an airborne badge, a commando badge. It was literally like, I'd done every arduous course that you could do in the Royal Engineers, and then your sort of last option then was Tier 1 Special Forces. But that all helped me towards Tier 1 Special Forces. That makes sense. I took something from my time in those units. I looked at different leaders, took the good things from leaders, took the bad, and saw how bad leaders were
Hmm.
operating.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'd only say the biggest difference, I can't really go into too many details of what we did
Sure.
in the tier 1 because I'm governed by the official secrecy act. But, it literally was the same guys. It literally is the same guys. It's just that you have a different budget. You have a different
Uh-huh.
budget. You have more equipment,
Yeah.
unlike, for example, in a good example, actually in Afghanistan, I know a lot of the other units, they're bidding for aircraft. We need aircraft, for these missions. And obviously they
Hmm.
have to prioritize who gets those assets.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. We actually have our own assets sat there for us whenever we want. And so that was the real big difference, is the fact that, was the money that we had, the
Yeah.
equipment, and also the missions are slightly different. Interesting to hear, like, they don't reference Tier 1 Special Forces in the US. They call them Special Mission Units.
Hmm.
That's the difference, because everyone in America is Special Forces when you speak to them. So, it's like, so the big
Yeah.
differentiate. And I don't mean it as a dig. So in the UK,
No,
the
it's the
only
same here. It's the same here. Everybody, and we get really pissed with that. For anyone who's actually in special forces, it's like, bro.
Yeah, I think it's just the terminology is different. In
Yeah.
the UK, Special Forces is the SAS and the SBS, and whereas the Tier 2s, they don't call them Tier 2 Special Forces, they call them Elite Forces.
Hmm.
And so really, when you reference Special Forces in the UK, it's either SAS or SBS. Whereas here in America, their Special Forces are their Tier 2 community, and they have like 65,000 on SOCOM within the Tier 2. So
Yeah.
the special forces are here, but they then call what our special forces, they call special mission units. And
Hmm.
so That's the big differentiator. So here, I can't say I'm special forces. I say I'm a special mission unit, and then it sort of then differentiates you from the others.
Yeah.
But that's a great terminology, because that literally was what we were doing in the UK, different from other times in the commando forces. It was more those special mission units. We weren't going out the door all the time, putting ourselves at risk. We would go out and sort of really disrupt the Taliban infrastructure, the what we call high value targets. So a lot of these other units, tier 2 guys were probably seeing more action than us sometimes, but our operations were slightly different. We would pick and choose the place. I'd be very much close quarter operations.
Yeah.
But very different.
What is the craziest war story you got that you can think of, that you're allowed to share, of course?
Yeah. It's actually in my book. People talk about, what's your scariest time? What was your scariest time?
Okay.
And the great one about this story is, there's no bombs, there's no bullets, no one dies, but it just sort of gives it a sense of the operations that we did and how your senses could be heightened. So we used to pick up Taliban agents. We used to dress up as Taliban. Literally black beard, turban, the lot. And we would go pick up these agents from Kandahar, and we were assisting the intelligence services, like MI6. Everyone thinks MI6, James Bond, these guys are great. They're actually dangerous with guns. And so, but very intelligent people. So we would do the handling. We would pick them up. But there's no point in us trying to plan a route each day to go pick up these agents, because 9 times out of 10, when we go into the city, there's the roadblocks that pop up, and they've got their own people looking around.
So plan B, C, whatever, right? Contingency.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would, we had 3 vehicles. I'm the lead vehicle, and I would drive, and I'd have an Afghan special forces guy with me, who's more of an interpreter. We would drive past the target. Second vehicle picks up target. Third vehicle makes sure there's no surveillance follow-up. And that was it, without going into too much detail. So this one day I hit a roadblock, and I get directed to go right, and it's very narrow market street, shops either side, and it's bumper to bumper with traffic. And I don't like putting anything in my eyes. I don't like putting contact lenses in my eyes or anything. So I had quite blue eyes. I had, makeup. So I had a tan skin. I had a dark beard anyway, and a turban. So my eyes were really like piercing through. But luckily for me, in Afghan, especially with the Russian war, there's a lot of people with ginger beards and blue eyes anyway.
Right.
But I know that I shouldn't be there, and my senses are heightened, and people start knocking on the window.
I hate that. I hate that.
And they start pointing.
Yeah.
And so I think we've been compromised, because I'm misreading this situation, thinking, right, they've seen my eyes, and I mean, there's more people now pointing at the car and hitting it. Okay. So I said to my Terp, I said, I think we've been compromised. And he said, yeah, I agree. And so we have internal communications in the vehicle. They can hear all this back in HQ. And then my ops officers then asking me questions in my ear. And, I'm acknowledging with beeps and tones on a button, And, he said, are you happy with the IA drill? Yeah, I'm happy with that. And the IA drill is basically I have to grab this MP5 Kurtz from underneath my seat, which already loaded with 30 rounds, 39 millimeter rounds. I go full automatic into the windscreen, which basically gives me some time and space to grab my weapon, which is wrapped in a shemag in the door, go to the back of the vehicle where there's a light anti-tank weapon like an RPG. And I basically have to destroy the vehicle because you don't want them going into enemy hands because of the communications kit. So this is all going on in my head. I'm happy with a drill. Yeah, happy with a drill. I've got visions of me being on CNN in an orange suit. You know what I mean?
Jeez.
Running like flip-flops about 17 miles back to CAF. So anyway, as this is going on, this traffic's slowly nudging forward. So I'm still progressing with the traffic, also trying to get away from the people. And then as I go to grab that weapon, the second vehicle comes around the corner, and all I hear from my friend is stop, stop, stop. And so as soon as he says that, I just drop. drop the weapon. And he says, "Oh, your turban's caught in the door." So I talk about how you misread the situation.
Yeah.
I thought everyone was bad, because you're in that area, and yes, there's
Right.
bad people, but it wasn't. People were generally being nice, trying to help me and let me know that the turban was caught in my door. So I use that a lot when I talk about situation awareness, but I actually learned a lot of that as well when I left the military, about everyone's perception of certain groups and cultures, and they're all not actually that bad as well. So yeah, that's probably for me. Like I say, no rounds fired, no nothing, but just really for myself, how scared I was, because I knew I shouldn't have been there.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy. Yeah, I think that's something that I feel sorry for the Western operators that have to operate in the Middle East, because it is such a different world than the one that you grew up in, like you're pointing out. And for us, it's different because we know that. I mean, we know who hates us or whatever, right? But like I've done some similar work like that. Um, and you have that feeling like everybody's on you, so to speak, right? It's that feeling when you got something to hide, right? You're always feeling like, oh, no, he's on to me, he gave me the stink eye or whatever. And you're just it's like you have to just learn to calm your senses, right? And read the crowd, right? And essentially have good body language skills, and not to mention social cues or cultural cues, I guess, right, that are different.
Yeah.
um, and I just can't imagine being in your shoes. That's like, to me, 10 times more suck, I think, than growing up and in the environment. It's much easier to see those nuances and kind
Yeah.
of calm your senses, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of my friends in the Duvdevan unit, and there's also the similar unit for the border police that do the undercover work, and those dudes, man, it's intense work, and I take my hat off to them, because I don't know if I could do that kind of work. Um, but yeah. So um, a lot of people, I think, when they see people like Bear Grylls, right,
Yeah.
who represents the Special Forces community, the Tier One SAS, SBS, um, you know, and like my kids, they think all the time that daddy is on the level of Bear Grylls when it comes to survival, right?
Yeah.
Hey, dad, what do we do with this? And hey, what do we do with that? And so, and you mentioned Clint Emerson, right? I mean, he also has his book series of survival, which I have, and I'm teaching my kids.
Okay,
So,
cool.
so I just wanted to, talk about that a little bit, right? Because I think there's this false perception, right, that everyone who's of that background are like this elite, throw us in the middle of nowhere and you'll just be able to survive off drinking your own piss and stuff, right?
Yeah. It's not at all. Obviously, Bear's gone on. Interesting enough, that Bear, he was, I think he was a reservist in the SAS. Actually,
Mhm.
I'm not too sure, but yeah, he's gone on and built a great brand on that. There was another guy actually. Yeah, but you're right. Everyone has a perception that we can survive for days, But when we do our SEER course, our survival of evasion, resistance, extraction,
Yeah.
uh, it's nothing like the survival that Bears interpreting and some of these other guys. There was another guy, I'm trying to think, Ray Mears, his name was. There's a guy called Ray Mears, who was a very, before Bear Grylls, he was like the survival expert. It wasn't on my selection. I think it was one before. It was his last one that he did on that selection. The reason for that was he was coming in and he was teaching guys, well, if you have, some brake fluid and you have some sugar and you have some newspaper, and it's like, well, if you have all those ingredients, you can make fire, you can do this. And it turned out,
Yeah.
people like him and Bear, they're more, you're on an island, or you're maybe in an aircraft's crashed and you need to survive for a long period of time in a
Yeah.
static position
Exactly.
while someone comes looks for you.
Right.
Whereas our survival is very different. Our survival is you literally need to be able to move 20 to 30 miles a day whilst evading the enemy, staying undercover, and literally grabbing food and what you can along the way. So they're two very different means of survival. Their survival is static. Our survival is you are then heading towards a war RV. But I have no interest in doing that. I think some people they love it. Some people. I remember Ray Mears. He did a documentary of a good friend of mine, Jace, on the Telemark Heroes. That was it. And I remember Jace was a mountain leader in the Royal Marines. They do a lot of survival, especially Arctic survival. And he's like, so Ray, did you just get bullied as a kid? Did you just go into the wood and start making shelters and things like that? He's probably like beasting him. But yeah, there are two different types of survivals.
Yeah. Epic. Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I'm sending my kid to a special program, after school program, with a former teammate of one of my best friends, who's in our equivalent to the SAS. It's the Air Force Special Forces unit, and this guy used to be the head of the survival portion of their training, right?
Amazing.
So it's great. So so my kid, he keeps thinking I know all this stuff, and I'm like, hey, I'm learning from you, He's the Bear Grylls of. And it's so cute because he's like, Dad, I think, you're more than, you're more, I don't know how he says it, but something like, like you're better than Bear Grylls or whatever. You're better than his instructor. And I'm just like, how do I tell my son, like, your dad doesn't have those skills,
I'm not building a tree house out of balsa wood out there.
No. And we were in some pretty rough, survival stints in battle during this year long that we've been fighting here, and had to fend for ourselves, so to speak, different than most of the military that's getting equipment and food of different kinds of whatever, but nothing like that. I mean, it's just like, how do you tell them? It's like, it's glorified MREs, okay? Like that.
And the environments as well. I recently did a show with Netflix called Toughest Forces on Earth, and we did the survival, evasion, resistance, extraction course in the Arctic.
Yeah,
two completely different environments from where maybe Bear is in the desert, or some of these other ones. Again, it's you have these survival experts.
Yeah,
but it's for the regions that they live in. It may be jungle, it may be desert, it may be Arctic. It's very hard to be an expert in all those areas. Yeah.
So what was your favorite? So that was one of my questions actually, is about that show. I wanted to bring that show up because, people might have heard of you from the SAS Australia show, which I think it's okay. It's cool. It's a bunch of civilians, whatever. Right. Yeah. But that show that you just recently did that got released on Netflix. Yeah. The difference is you're with actual forces. You're with actual special forces teams all over the world. Which team would you say was your favorite team to learn from, or to be, kind of spend time with?
Yeah. So for your listeners, the show's called Toughest Forces on Earth. It's 8 episodes, and it's a bit like Top Gear with guns, but we can't call it Top. Yeah, but we can't call it gun. And so 3 middle-aged men flying around the world and we're basically showcasing what's unique about these different special forces around the world. I remember actually when we were doing the initial planning, Israel, we were going to come to Israel.
I was going to tell you, why not? Hello.
Yeah. I don't know why they didn't. There was a few. I think also because we hadn't done the first series, no one really knew what the concept of the show was like. I remember we were chatting to Japan, and Japan were worried that we'd make them look bad, and that wasn't the purpose of the show. Like now, if season 2 gets signed off, I've got no doubt everyone will be knocking on the door because it's a great recruitment platform as well.
Yeah. But so you got my number,
Yeah, exactly. We went around the world and we showcased what was unique about these units, geographically where they were located, the enemies that they were fighting, the environments they were fighting in. And, we had everything from, I think episode 1 we're in Jordan, your neighbors. Jordan in the desert. And then we go to the Arctic Circle in Sweden. And next thing we're in Colombia in the jungle. Yeah. So, it's really interesting, as we were talking about earlier, about the recent conflicts, busiest time in UK and US Special Forces history, all in the sand in the desert. But people aren't aware that actually we operate in all the environments. And So that was good. The standout, your original question, which ones stood out? There, well, I like, there's only one tier 1 unit on there. It was the Austrian Jag Commando. I liked them because
Good.
I knew I could be relatable to their TTPs and
Yep.
everything that we were doing.
Yep.
The Colombians, the Jungla police, because they're police, they're actually not special forces, and
Right.
these guys had more capabilities and money than some of the other special forces units that we visited. And so they were a real standout to me. And also the fact that, we've talked about the end of the Afghan war, the end of the Iraq war now, recruitment's at an all-time low because people want one action. These guys, it's easy when we go abroad and go conflicts and come home and we're safe,
Yeah.
like obviously, you're very similar to the Colombians. It's on your doorstep.
That's right.
These guys are fighting day in, day out. They're getting rounds down every day. And then also having to go home and have to be denied that they're in the in the police. So they're a big standout to me. And then the Filipinos as well. And the reason for the Filipinos is the opposite of the Colombians. They didn't have a big budget. But oh my God, the morale on these guys, they just were smiling from ear to ear. It was just almost like the character of the Filipino Navy SEALs that stood out to me as well.
Yeah, I think that was my takeaway from watching the show. More or less encapsulated what you said there.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with the Austrians, but then, like you're pointing out, you have these Colombians and the Mexicans as well, right? That had this back door, you're like in your backyard reality, like you pointed out, but then have to go back to normal life as if nothing, which is like a lot of the guys that I know, a lot of my good friends are in those similar units, right? And I think a good unit that would be similar to what you were talking about with these Colombians is our Yamam unit. So there, I would say, if it's, again, I'm biased because we have a lot of good friends from Yamam in my own team, and also one of my fellow team members was a Yamam. What do you call it? He did his service in Yamam and finished. So, or I forget what you call that. Any case. So he was my team member in Gaza, my number 2 guy, right? And I was just like, dude, I feel so safe right now. It's like, because you got one of these senior Yamam guys who's like, he's in his 50s, right?
Right.
And the dude is like frosty and tough as nails and literally fought, I don't know, tens of terrorists on October 7th, right? In close quarter gun battles. So yeah, those guys are police, but they're, I would say, the most elite probably in the country as far as training, budget, etc. And they're not military, right? But they're all military background. They all start in normal, and then that's actually something you do later on. So that's cool. I really like the show. I really appreciate watching the 2 old farts, yourself and the Navy SEAL, with this young kid, because it reminded me of some of the guys that we went to war with, of the paratroopers, because they're these young kids that we were basically coaching and building them up and going to battle with. And, it's like they've never been in a war. And like my whole team have been in multiple wars.
Yeah.
And it was just like, your Ranger buddy kind of reminded me of that. These young guys with the young spirit, and it's such a different world.
Yeah, the dynamic work. Originally I got approached 3 years ago about the concept, and I was like, okay. My name went forward. It was a British production company. It was me and about 150 names from the UK. And then my name came out as top, and I was like, well, that's strange, because I hadn't done SAS Australia at this point. So I hadn't done any TV. I was like, well, why? They said, well, you look like you were the fittest. I was like, okay. What's the premise of the show? It was like, you're going to be doing selection 8 times. I was like, what? I'm 47 years old. No, I'm 47 now. I was 45 at the time.
Yeah.
And then Netflix came back and said, no, because Netflix is from US. We were thinking more of an American. So I then had to fly out to Dallas, do a chemistry test with 4 other Americans. And that's where Ryan was. And I found Ryan, and Ryan was the better one of the 4. So we chose Ryan. So it was me and Ryan. But Ryan's only probably about 3 or 4 years younger than me. So a similar age, similar era.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of had mutual respect for each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but the commissioner was the same commissioner that did Top Gear. Actually, he said it doesn't work with two. We need, so at the 11th hour, we need a third guy. It's called the fall guy. And I have a good friend of mine. He was telling me the concept. Basically, what they do it as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's how they work it with these three hosts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had to interview a couple of YouTubers, Cameron being one. I mean, the other guy actually wasn't Special Forces, so unfortunately, he couldn't be the person. Cameron comes on. He's got his nose ringing and his his hair slicked back, and I'm like, what's this? American Idol? Just beasted into him. But actually, dynamics worked really well, although limited experience in the military. He was literally everything I'd done before, and it was almost like a revision. Everything he was doing was for the first time ever. A lot of it, anyway. But the difference between me and Ryan and Cameron is like Ryan and I are new to the TV. Cameron's a YouTuber, very, very confident in front of the camera, happy to talk in there. And so, it worked out really well, the dynamics. Yeah. And, I'm assuming I'm the father, Cameron's the son, and Ryan's the Holy Ghost.
That's epic. I love it. I love that part where you took off his Ranger tab thing, and
it was more of a respect thing. You're on a Navy camp and he's carrying this Rangers. But I was actually also, interesting enough because, we probably, they probably aired 25% of what we actually recorded.
For sure.
But I told him a couple of times before that why we don't wear patches. You don't wear patches. You have to, when you're on the ground in operations, you sanitize your kit. You don't let people know what unit you're from. Mm-hmm. And so I told him a couple of times. He ignored me, and I grabbed it. I just threw it.
That cracked me up because that was like I said, how I felt was a lot of these younger guys. We would kind of, I don't know how you call it, I guess, stinging them or just kind of give them that old fart comments and in our time this, in our time that.
It's like
you got to do that.
It's really interesting because the show, they can sort of change the way it looks or edit it to a certain thing. Which was annoying me sometimes. It was really interesting because I was like that with the production because they're like, oh yeah, but we can cut over that. I'm like, no, we need to do it exactly how it is. I said, and they said, well, look, 99% of the audience don't really. I said, I don't care about 99%. I just care about 30 to 50 guys I know who we want. If they get it right, they will love it.
Exactly.
The only thing they couldn't manipulate or sort of twist was the physical stuff, and so I made a point of absolutely wasting the two American 47 making a point. And I mean it did start turning into the tier 1 tier 2 thing, so which is fine, but a lot of people can see the differences between not our humor but our characters on the show.
I think it was a great production, really good, good way to highlight different special forces around the world. And definitely, I mean, again, I appreciate it for being a guy who's in that world. And it didn't feel overly edited and overly fake like a lot of these shows.
Yeah. It wasn't.
And so I think you guys did a pretty good job. And but I'm like you, I just finished doing this film that I'm working on, and I'm supposed to be the military guy in it, and doing certain things, and I was just like, but I wouldn't, and the director's like, well, what if we, and it's like I'm trying to like meet his vision of the Hollywood, make it interesting, cool. I wouldn't do, but okay, heck, well, why not, and just go along with it. And I think that's something that people just need to understand is, you can't, in the veteran community, you can't be nitpicky with TV shows and just appreciate for what it is,
There's a fine line between authenticity and entertainment, but you can still be quite authentic and still keep the entertainment, it's a hard balance, but Hollywood, I call it Hollywood biceps, bullets and bombs. They love really just blowing everything up and stuff like that.
Exactly.
That won't really happen, but go on in.
So I want to change gears here a little bit. and get into the field that really kind of drew me to to following you, being interested in your background
Mm.
was your EP or executive protection work. Um, and just the fact that you had well, actually, before I talk too much, I want you to go ahead and explain what got you into that work, what drew you to that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I got injured after 16 years. No, my 16 years. I was, in the SBS, I was doing a hey ho jump training in Oman. We're just about to go back out to Afghanistan in 2 weeks' time. And unfortunately, I had a bad parachute accident on exit. I got my leg caught in the line, and
Oh,
it was a freak accident. It tore my ACL, my MCL, lateral meniscus, hamstring, calf, and quadricep, all the supporting muscles as well. So,
oh,
when everyone else went off to Afghanistan, I started looking at getting operated on physio, and then end of my career. So, not something I planned for. I know I was a lifer. I would still be in now, without a doubt.
wow.
So had this whole transition. I went through a huge identity crisis. I got to where I was in the military because of my physical robustness,
Hmm.
and done some amazing things to what is my role now within society. My
Hmm.
wife, very entrepreneurial. She helped set up our first security company on a BlackBerry, watching TV. It was actually, my transition was quite smooth compared to others because
Yeah.
the stuff that I've been leaning on the military for, they sort of, they're like your mother, your father. I say they clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time, they pay the national
Exactly.
insurance, so you can concentrate on your job. She sort of took that role from them, so that transition was smooth. But
Yeah.
I didn't want to be going out to Afghan and Iraq doing that stuff. A lot of my friends had set up their own maritime security companies to tackle the Somalian
Yep.
piracy and do
Yep.
really well. I wanted to find a niche within the industry. But to add to the pressure, my wife was like 8 months pregnant when I left the military, so I was worrying if there's any work there. But it was right in the
Wow.
middle of the Arab Spring, and
Yep.
so my first job within 48 hours, I wanted to do EP, and actually I spoke to a good friend of mine. He who worked at one of these big companies. He said the money isn't in Afghan and Iraq. In the security industry, you'll know this. The risk reward ratio isn't balanced at all. You could be taking some big risks
Yep.
and these places on 50% of what these guys are in 5-star hotels, sailing super yachts around the world. And I was like, well, that's
Yep.
where I'm going. I'll
Yep.
go
Yep.
where the money is. And so me and my wife actually ended up going on I had already done my PS1s, which is the SFEP course.
Which is
But
what you need in England? Like, is there a certain license that you need?
no, this is purely for special forces. This is for
Hmm.
us. So when we're on operation, should like the prime minister, a member of royal family come, we take over on the EP on that side. So
Right.
it's more of a role within the special forces. Um,
Huh.
a friend of mine, he told me about this gentleman, a guy called Jins Johnson, ex SAS. I think he's in his 70s now. He trained the Mujahideen. He used to train the Mujahideen back in the 70s when the SAS was
Hmm.
working alongside them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
he was the guru in corporate close protection. And so me and my wife went on his course. We did his program, and then we were going to go, set up the company together.
Yeah.
So I sort of focus on that corporate EP. My first job within 40 hours was to help and set the British Embassy in Benghazi during the Arab Spring.
Wow.
And I soon identified when I got there that the Libyans didn't want to be in another Afghan in Iraq. They wanted to take control of the country once Gaddafi had fallen. Gaddafi was still in Tripoli at this point, but surrounded.
Hmm.
But when I was listening in on some of these meetings, and you had the oil and gas companies, the NGOs, all the media, and we had these big security companies. I never name and shame. I call them the big five, and they were charging 6-7 figure sums for crisis management and
Yeah.
evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place. And
Uh-huh.
so I came back from that trip. My wife gave birth to our daughter, and I said, "Look, I have an idea. I need to take some money out of the bank, our savings." And so I went back out to Libya, and there was a huge proliferation of weapons at this time because it was still the Arab Spring. And I bought 30 weapons off the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt, and designed my own evacuation plans. I put
Dang.
content in there, put money in there. And then I just spent a month in the desert burying these, marking out these plans. We lived in Aberdeen, which is the oil and gas capital of Europe. So we had access to these oil and gas companies and service companies. And I sold it as a retainer to a couple of the companies that were out there, hopefully never needing to use it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I then carried on in that corporate EP. Each phone call was very different. One phone call, take the UAE royal family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives. The next one, I'm training the Kurdish Special Forces to fight ISIS. We did the London Olympics. We did the Visa Soccer World Cup. We did all these. But I was learning each time I got a phone call. I was working ad hoc, which was a lot of guys like to have comfort knowing they've got secure work and would rather do 6-week rotations. Luckily for me, I had a very forgiving wife. And so each time I got a phone call, it was a different country, it was a different task. And I was building up this great network of people and understanding more about the whole security industry. But I just finished the London Olympics in 2012. And I was out in Benghazi when the American ambassador got killed. I say right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time. I then got a phone call, made aware of a German oil company that had some engineers stuck in Benghazi. So I drove into the city, still not knowing what had happened, what was happening at this point, because it's still all going off. And I grabbed these guys rather than going back.
This is during the embassy attack?
This is during the embassy attack, the evening of September 11th, 2012.
The same night?
Same night, exactly the same night, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Rather than, and again, we still didn't know what was going on, but rather than taking, because I had drivers from Benghazi, rather than taking the coastal road straight to Tripoli, which other companies without a real bit of intelligence behind them probably would have done because it's the quickest route to safety. But what people don't realize is 167 tribes in Libya, taking a Benghazi driver, trying to get him through Misrata and into Tripoli is just going to cause mayhem. Yep. So what I did is I had a safe house in Zella, which is southwest of Benghazi, about 3-hour drive. And so we just pushed out there, stayed in the safe house for 24 hours. Unbeknown to my drivers from Benghazi, I had drivers coming in from Tripoli. Mm-hmm. But what it was it was a bit of a soap period because we were now then seeing on the news what was going on. And then the next morning, it was like the OK Corral. The drivers from Tripoli arrived and the drivers from Benghazi were all had their guns out. And I said, look, I can't take you guys, as in the Benghazi drivers, to Tripoli. You're going to cause us issues. Yeah. So that's what I did. I successfully got these guys out. Everyone got paid, which was great. Because of the success of that. And then 2 years later, I got a phone call. I was in Brazil doing the Football World Cup with Visa. Mm-hmm. And again, 5-star hotels, very glamorous, zero risk. And I get a phone call from the Canadian embassy. It's now the Tripoli war. And I said, look, your name keeps coming up. Everyone's left. All the other embassies are gone. Security companies are gone. Yeah. We're stuck here. Can you escort us out? So went back in, used my local fixer, got 2 fish wagons. And successfully got 18 military and 4 diplomats. The whole Canadian embassy from Tripoli to Tunis. So I soon then got a name within the EP world of being the guy for the evacuations. And but then I took a sabbatical after that. My wife told me I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar.
Oh, Lord.
And then that's when I then did the world record bike ride. Decided I was going to focus my efforts into something else. Never cycled before. Only cycled 20 miles and applied for the world record for the world's longest road.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah. And then we did that for a non-profit around mental health. Fast forward 15 months later, I smashed the world record by 17 days at the age of 41. Become the first man in history to do it under 100 days. And we raised £930,000 for the charity. But where that's quite key in this story is up until then, from my time in the Special Forces, from the security stuff I was doing, no one knew who Dean Stott was.
Mm-hmm.
The evacuations, we kept it very key. But because of the profile, the high profile, we were working with members of the royal family on this non-profit because of the success of it and then going to the royal wedding. That's when book opportunities, TV opportunities, and everything came from. So where I go with this, everyone up until that point then thought I was now in the world of media. That's what Dean does. Dean guest speaks. He writes books. He does Netflix.
Right.
which I do.
Yeah.
But I was chatting to the head of station in one of the Middle Eastern countries recently, and he's like, "I've just Googled you," and we were talking about some security stuff.
Yeah.
I said, "There's two Dean Stotts. There's the one that the world sees
Yeah.
on social media, and then there's the one that the world doesn't see, which is still 75% of very high-profile security operations." But where this sort of changed, or when people then soon realized that I hadn't left the industry, was Israel. October.
That's
7th.
right. That's right.
So October the 7th. So going back actually a little bit more back to the Afghan pullout. I wasn't in Afghan at the time, but because of the successes that we had in Benghazi and in Libya, my phone was going off. So me and Alana were in so many WhatsApp groups, and we had guys on the ground in Afghanistan who were helping us. And so we were sort of really assisting all these other groups, because, again, a lot of them were let down by their security providers because they realized they weren't actually covered on their insurance. So we ended up assisting over 1,200 with various parties, just really and unlike Libya and obviously Israel, where I was physically in there, moving people, this was a paper pushing exercise. It was getting the right phone calls, getting the right paperwork, etc. Yeah. So people were aware that I did that. Jack Carr and I actually chatted about this on one of his podcasts.
That's right.
So then when the Israel situation, October the 7th, 2023, a day that everyone will remember, where were you on October the 7th? Well, I'll tell you where I was. I was in Disneyland.
Oh, my Lord. What a difference, eh?
Yeah, what a difference. A friend of ours, they'd invited us to Club 33. It's like a private members club. So we didn't even have the kids. And so we were there, and my phone was, I sensed someone was going on. My phone started pinging. And I'm sort of looking at it, and I'm like, okay. But again, had a day at Disneyland, woke up the next morning, and then my phone's just going off. I had a good client, a friend of mine who's a client, and his auntie and uncle, Indian origin, they were on a tour in Bethlehem at the time. And he's like, the tour guide seems to think it's quite safe. What do you think? And Alana's looking at the news, and she's like, I've got you a ticket. I was like, sorry? She goes, you're going. And I was like, okay. So the difference between Israel and Libya and Afghanistan and all these other places, Sudan, we did some assistance. I'd never been to Israel. I didn't have infrastructure in place. I didn't have safe houses. I didn't have any else. But what I did have from the others is I had knowledge and experience of how to execute these evacuations quickly. So I had a couple of a lot of Israeli friends, but I had a couple of Israeli friends from the security industry. I sort of said, look, I'm flying in. So I had at least someone to help me when I got on, or meet and greet me when I arrived. So my wife buys me a flight, Turkish Airlines, on October the 8th. I go to LAX. By the time I get to LAX, it's been cancelled. So a lot of flights now are getting cancelled.
That's right.
And so I sort of know that you have to be quick on your decision. We couldn't be waiting around because the airspace could soon shut. But El Al had started opening loads of flights to get a lot of the Israeli people back, especially the fighting age males to get them back into country. So as we're traveling back home, my wife's like, there's a flight on El Al. Booked the flight El Al, turned around and got back to LAX. I turned up, really interesting. I turn up, and then I'm in this queue, and these Israeli intelligence guys, they're coming along the queue, checking people's passports. And he looks at me. I've got all my 5'11" gear. I look like a private security contractor. Yeah. He's like, so wait, who are you visiting? I said, I don't know yet. He's like, okay.
Oh, no.
And he's like, yeah. And he says, do you have a letter? I said, no, I don't have a letter. And he goes, so what do you do? I said, I have a security company. I specialize in evacuations. Is that great? Do you have a website? I said, no, I don't have a website. I've never needed a website. And so the funny thing was I was being fully transparent with this guy. I was actually telling him the truth.
Right.
Whereas I hear then later on, a few days later, guys are trying to make up stories and just not get in. I was like, no.
You don't do that. You don't
want to do that. I was fully transparent with him.
Yeah.
And so I actually showed him some of the stuff that I'd done and links. He went away And then his partner's out to me, he goes, "Are you in MI6?" I said, "Do I look like I'm in MI6?" I said, "I'm too big." And I was sort of joking with him.
Yeah.
That was the hardest thing. That was the hardest thing, getting past those two guys. But actually,
Yeah.
as I was boarding the plane, he pulled me aside, wished me all the best and thanked me for what I was doing.
Yeah.
Got on the flight. Alana, we'd sort of messaged a few people we knew from the Jewish community in London, in New York, in LA, and just to say, look, Dean's on his way over. Does anyone need any help? Like I said, we didn't really know who we were going. We didn't really know what to expect, because I always say the media monster portrays this, this vision. When you're actually on the ground, it's totally different, which was the case. So I land 13 hours later, and everyone's singing, cheering when they get back to their homeland. Yep. And by which point, Alana now has 65 families who need assistance. And what it was, as you know, it was the Sukkot holiday. Is it this? Did I?
Sukkot.
Yeah.
Holiday. So it's Feast of Tabernacles.
Holiday. Yeah. So there were so many people. I think just alone from Boston and New York, there were 10,000 families in Israel at the time.
That's right.
So it wasn't the fact that it was dangerous. I got there and it was like, wow. I landed in Tel Aviv, went to Jerusalem straight away because I was the first family that needed assistance. What we had issues with was the fact that commercial flights were getting cancelled. So people were struggling to get onto other flights. You also had a lot of elderly people there as well who didn't really understand technology and how to book a flight and things like that. And there was those sort of nuances we were dealing with. Yeah. What I had though is we'd just been filming in Jordan, as I touched on with Netflix. Yeah. So I was chatting to the fixers there, the drivers. We knew everyone from the head of the Special Forces all the way up to King Abdullah. And so we had a route to get people out there. I can understand perfectly why the Jewish didn't feel comfortable doing that. But I had Buddhists, I had Christians, I had other sort of religions. And so we were getting them out on the King Abdullah Bridge across to Jordan, which was one of the options. The issue with that, though, was normally the bridge is open 24 hours a day. It was only open so many hours a day. So we had that route. The first thing I had to do was get people, because at the time you had people down in Eilat, we had people up in the north, in Nazareth, and and Haifa. Up in Haifa. So there's people dispersed. Now I've now landed on the morning of the 9th, and so it's still very raw.
Sure.
When you talk about safety-wise, it was probably the safest place in the world at that time, especially Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. There wasn't a street corner where there wasn't someone armed, as in police or military. Yep. And so really there was people dispersed everywhere. So we were trying to get everyone into the central belt between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. What we didn't know, obviously you were there anyway at the time, what we didn't know what was going to be happening, how quick this was going to escalate. Was this now going to start involving Hezbollah from the north? Because I think if Hezbollah got involved, there was risk then that the Tel Aviv, because you could still fly in with the Gaza issue, you could still fly into Tel Aviv because they just come in from the north. But if Hezbollah then got involved, then it would limit the airspace. So people were panicking about that.
Exactly.
But what I saw, people were there. We got offered a chartered aircraft. I was like, perfect. But the problem you had is the chartered aircraft was being chartered from the commercial. The commercial were basically cancelling their flights and selling it to these people who wanted to do good for a chartered. So we had people who were on that flight then cancelled and then trying to get them on all to these other flights. And they then wanted to charge a ticket, which was more than the actual commercial. So we had all these a real mess when it came to the airspace. But Alana was dealing with that, which was great. She was dealing with that. But then I was we had the road option. I always look at when I do these evacuations, at least having, if it's on land and has water, then you have the three options. You have the road, the air, and the sea. And again, so we were already ramping up potential options for Cyprus as well. But what I did when I was there, I managed to then build the plan when I was on the ground. We had safe houses and such in place. And actually, it was only about 4 days And then the airspace had all sorted itself out. Those that had gone out by road, we didn't need the sea option, but we had that option anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
it really, really settled down. And it was about 5 or 6 days before I saw the next security company. And the people were like, how did you get in so quick? And I said, the reason I got in quick is because we're not a large security company. We don't need board approval. We don't need to start pulling together teams. It's a husband and wife. She makes the decision, and then I fly off. But a couple of things that were upsetting me. Social media was like, I have to almost remain impartial. You know what I mean? I've evacuated people from all religions. I actually did a TV interview, and of all the places that I did this, it was the holiest place in the world. It was Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And I did this TV interview, and I said, look, I don't believe in religion. I do believe in bigger power. I don't focus on a specific religion. I just believe in good and bad. That's what I said. But of all the places I was saying this interview was the holiest city in the world.
Yeah.
But then I remember there was an old couple, and they used to live in Ashkelon. Their house had been rocketed, the street had been rocketed, so they moved up towards Tel Aviv, and we had a flight for them, literally a last-minute flight we could get them on. I think it was like 2 a.m. So I rang them up at 10 o'clock. I said, "We've got you on this flight at 2 a.m." Like, yeah, but our passports are still in Ashkelon. I was like, "What?" So I drove from Jerusalem down. That was a great thing about Israel; it's so small.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You can get from one place to another. I remember going to Ashkelon that evening. They gave me the phone number of the neighbor. She handed the bag, had everything in there, and I did a little video of the street because it had been rocketed and things like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I'm in my t-shirt, my jeans, and things like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next morning I see Fox News, and there's this other US Special Forces influencer, and he's got his helmet on his body in Ashkelon. This is the most dangerous place in the world. I'm like, oh my God, you're not helping, Matt. You know what I mean? So, I saw the good and bad, but where I did see the good is, do you know about the Bible college story? Have you heard this one or not?
Probably not.
No.
I'm glad to hear. But it's just so cool because everything you're discussing and mentioning here, so I'm in combat, right?
Yeah.
From the first morning. So my unit is one of the first reserve units that's actually together, right? Like showed up for missions, for duties. But we're not one of the first ones activated, right? So we get sent to the southern communities probably a day later, give or take.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was a day later. I can't remember exactly. Ironically, I don't know why, but I believe it was the next day. And I remember we were just like, eating ourselves up because good friends of ours are fighting terrorists. One of our good friends killed 3 terrorists and they tried to get to his house in Sderot, for example, and so on. And it's just like really intense. A lot of our good friends are either getting killed or in combat. And we're just sitting there on the tarmac, so to speak, of our base, waiting for orders, right? Because we're not a direct action unit.
Yeah.
And it's just driving us nuts. So we get there maybe a day later. And all that to say that while we're in all this uncertainty, search of terrorists in the town that we went to and we were finally given orders for, simultaneously, I'm trying to help these other groups doing what you're doing and just reaching out because I work for a security company that does exactly that does exactly what you're mentioning. And we have all our contacts, all our everything. So I'm like, hey, we're here to assist you. Just let me know if you need help. And I think I even reached out to you and you were like, hey, we're squared away, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Like awesome. Right. And I just thought it was so cool. And it was a good point that you mentioned. Like I noticed out of those that were doing this kind of work, like you made a good point. I think you were the least dramatic about it. And it gave me a lot of respect for you because I'm watching who's doing what. This is my industry, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, dude, like hear this guy. I'm almost sure he doesn't know the ins and outs of this country, but he's not letting it get to him. He's not making a drama queen about, oh, I'm here and it's really dangerous, or oh, I'm here and da-da. You were like so chill about it. I was like, you know what I mean? It drew my respect towards you. And I was like, okay, this is the way the silent professionals work. And it's what I pride my team of professionals here in this country of what we do. In fact, if I ever did that, my clients would freak out. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. But it's true.
is the way I look at it. You know, like if I'm not keeping cool and chill,
Yeah,
then what? Right? Then how's your client gonna
true.
think that? Oh, we're
Yeah,
safe with you, and
yeah.
you're like, oh, it's so dangerous.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
You have to remain calm because
yeah,
net positivity is contagious, negativity is contagious, fear is
yeah,
contagious.
yeah,
They look at you, and so regardless what you're feeling inside, you can't be showing
yeah,
out on the inside. But that's
yeah,
a really good point actually, because actually when Alana and I were dealing with people on the ground, obviously we're dealing with the families that are out in London and New York, and they're seeing something on the TV and thinking it's
exactly.
hell's
Hmm.
breaking loose. And I'm like, I remember this elderly couple. I'm like, and they're like, oh, we're all right. We're going to wait till we're just going to keep our original fight till next week. I said, well, you need to tell your son and daughter this because they're on us to get you out. So it's trying to manage those
Yeah,
expectations. People, like I
yeah,
said, the Israelis when I was there were very calm, very cool.
yeah,
But no, the back to the Bible quality. This is where I saw,
yeah.
I saw the negatives in social media. I mean, this is one of the great positive stories I saw. So I shared that I was on the ground. Jocko, Jack Carr, Sean Ryan, they all shared my story.
Hmm.
And there's a Bible college in the old city of Jerusalem from the Calvary Bible College. And the wife's called Elizabeth and the husband's called Matthew. He's a pastor. And strangely enough, they're from Huntington Beach originally, which is
Hmm.
25 minutes from here.
Yeah.
They've been over there 8 years, and they had a group over there, had 15 students, 14 American and one Indian.
Hmm.
And obviously, after October 7th, all the flights were getting cancelled. They'd exhausted all their options in getting these kids out. And
Yeah.
so, and they were under a lot of pressure now from the families as well, as we touched about, because they're obviously watching the media monster. And
Yeah.
so Elizabeth said she sat down, she said she prayed, and she follows Jocko. She loves Jocko Willing. And
Yeah.
she went on to Jocko. She's like, I wonder what Jocko would do. And she went on to Jocko's stories and saw me from the old city, Jerusalem, saying, here I am in country. If anyone needs assistance, reach out. So
Yeah.
she messaged on Instagram, and within 45 minutes, I'm walking into the oldest Protestant church in the world in the city walls. And I meet her and Matthew, and we sit down and we formulate a plan. And then, I think 48 hours later, every one of those students got home safely at no cost. We managed to get them on flights that were already coming in and out. So
Wow.
that's where I saw, the positives of social media. It can
Yeah.
be a great tool. I saw a lot of people turning on each other, but
That's
I
right.
did see the positives of it as well.
Yeah. It's funny because you keep mentioning this connection with the Indian and Christians. I'm almost positive I have this memory of one of the family members of an Indian child, teenager on one of these groups. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of these people you end up
Oh,
assisting.
really?
It just
Really?
rings so close. And again, I just don't want to give out too much information, but it's just really funny, right? Because it's like,
Yes.
well, I'll see what I can do. I'm kind of busy right now, and
Yeah.
and and like I think 90% of my workforce in my security company are actually in combat, including the CEO, who's he's a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Medic and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's just crazy times for us because we're like, we're stretched super thin,
Mm.
and but yet trying to again assist, and at least we had the back office, we had things that we could assist people with the best as we could.
Yeah.
um, and it
Yeah.
just I was so appreciative of just the work you were doing, others who were coming and trying to help, um, and I think one of the things I noticed is that uh, your wife was answering replies on your social media that were attacking you. And I was like, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, are these people like thick in the skull? I mean, like, this guy is not
In
a
fairness,
scientist.
there
He's
wasn't that
not
many.
he's
Yeah.
not like running around with the Israel flag saying, Israel. Like you're
No.
here doing a job helping nationals that are not Israeli, to
Yeah.
get them out of the country in a very hot situation. That's your job.
That's
Like
my
that's
job.
what you do as an EP. You don't get to pick sides in the country you go to. It's not. There's no politics involved here. It's a job. And I
Yeah.
just couldn't believe, the comments, but she was so good at answering these people. And I think I even made a little kind of, yeah, make a little rebuttal kind of thing.
Yeah.
And talk about your wife. That's another thing that I just noticed is, you guys are a real power couple. And I think that is so cool for people in this industry, right? Because it's very easy to each one do their own thing.
Yeah.
But like you guys are, you know, what I notice is like you're working together. Your wife is so supportive of you, and that's what makes you, to my, what I'm seeing from the outside is what makes you, Dean Stott, that we all see, that everybody's
Yeah.
like, oh wow. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it's the woman behind this guy, right?
Yeah.
Is that a right statement?
Oh no, without a doubt. I always like to sing Alana's praises because it's credit where it's credit due. Everyone. I always
Yeah,
joke that people see me. People see Bear Grylls, people see Jocko Willink. If I want something from Jocko, I don't speak to Jocko. I speak to his wife. What I mean? Because they're running the things, and where there's similarities there.
yeah,
Alana and I have a podcast. We've done a couple of seasons now. It's called Behind the Scene, as in SWEN. And what it is basically getting successful business people, celebrities, sports people that the
yeah.
world sees, but then also bringing their partners on. And then you soon
Hmm.
then realize actually none of this would be achievable if it wasn't for this person that sat next to you. But
Yeah,
they may not want to be front and center. They may not be, I know I'm the extrovert, Alana's the introvert. I know Alana's the brains. She's the one behind the scenes, does all the contracts, very much business savvy. So we
yeah,
understand our strengths and weaknesses. But where that sort of came from for me was like the special forces. I know for every operator, UKSF operator to step on the ground takes 7 other servicemen or women that you don't see.
yeah,
And if one of them doesn't do their job, then we're not going on the ground as well. And it's very similar to this. It's now, but with the behind the scene podcast where we were talking about, it tends to be in relationships where a man and a woman will come together, they'll get married, and they both have their own aspirations and want to be successful in their careers. But unfortunately, it's the females that have to sort of put their career on pause to start a family. I mean, the
hmm,
husband carries on doing what he's doing. I mean, there can
yeah,
be a lot of resentment, when he sees that he's doing it and you're stuck behind. But
yeah,
where Alana and I are sort of hoping to show others is actually you can do it together. You can both be very successful and still be aligned in what you're doing. I was over the moon. Alana got awarded the MBE 18 months ago from King Charles for services to human trafficking.
yeah,
Which is great. You talk about that site, the person behind the scene in silence. She got that for hers, and I was probably the biggest fan on that.
yeah,
And then likewise, I got mine awarded this year for humanitarian evacuations, sport and mental health. And she was my biggest voice on that. We don't like to, to share it too much. Or I was like, we have a thing called like humility. We try to keep, but we support each other. And yeah, I just think, Alana has been a catalyst in all these stories we talked about, the evacuation. She was the one who's back here in the US dealing with all those WhatsApp groups,
yeah,
chatting to all those people, sorting those flights out. I sometimes, I have the easy job, even with the bike ride, she was the campaign director. She got me £500,000 sponsorship as a non-cyclist. She raised $1.4 million.
yeah.
She jokes I had the easiest part. All I had to do was ride a bike. I was like, really? So we just understand our strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we work on them. And the good thing for us as well is more post Canadian embassy thing. When I came back from that day, and I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar, I'd got the yin and yang balance completely wrong. And
hmm,
so for me now, I don't go out the door unless it's been green lit by Alana and the kids.
yeah,
So the Israeli evacuations was a perfect example. She bought the flight, so which is great for me because then I know when I'm on the ground or I'm deployed, I'm not worrying, what's she thinking back home? Is she going to be, upset? She's
yeah,
got the full support of her, which makes my job a lot easier as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That is so important, and I think it's important for everybody who's listening to understand that you know it's the women that are behind
Oh,
great men, right? That make us who we are. Same with my wife. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it's not with her support.
yeah.
She's the one that encourages me, that pushes me forward. She's the one raising my kids. We do homeschooling, so yeah. So she takes a huge responsibility for our family, which allows me to do the work that I do. That allows me to be, public or whatever. But if you wanted to hear much wiser advice in life or whatever,
Yeah.
she should be the one doing the public speaking more than me.
Yeah.
Um, so that just really struck to me, because I think, unfortunately, one of the biggest weaknesses I see in the special forces community or military community is strong family relationships, right? Because I think, like you were pointing out, you had that imbalance and you got yourself on track. Um, a lot of the dudes, they will sacrifice their families for that military career, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I find that to be unfortunate, and it really breaks my heart to see, just so many guys just kind of give up on their family life to
Yeah.
pursue the cool guy life.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what it's all about. Because if you don't have anything to go back home to after all of that, career that you sacrificed for, well, then you have nothing. Really, you had nothing worth fighting for, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true.
You
And
know?
I always say, I was on a podcast with Andy Frisella. Him and I were chatting together, and I was talking about you have evolutions in life. It's great that you come from the special forces. It's great you have that background, but that was in the past. I get upset when I don't get upset. I should think of another word really, but it annoys me sometimes when I'm hearing guys who've left 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, talking
Yeah.
about, remember when we did this and did this? I was like, it's great. But what are you doing now? What are you doing now
Right.
to better your life? What are you doing to, so for me, I used to call it an evolution in life. Yes, I was in the special forces. That's great. That was an evolution in my life. I got so many great things from that. And I took the good things from that, and then I adopted that into the next evolution in life, which was the private security sector and the bike ride.
Yeah.
I'm now coming towards that end of evolution, is because, I can't still be doing this in my mid 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have those evolutions in life. And as you said, it's quite upsetting when guys focus so much on that first evolution that then when they start the next evolution, they're on their own.
Exactly.
That evolution should be with your family as well. They should follow you through those evolutions. Us moving to America 4 years ago, that was another evolution change for us.
Yeah.
It's been great. So, yeah.
Epic. Well, brother, I really appreciate your time. Guys, make sure to check out all the links I'll put here below. We have the website. We have your book. We have a few TV shows you've been on, and public speaking, 2 world records, if I remember correctly. Only?
Yeah.
Only. Yeah, I have 3 world records in nothing. But but really, I mean, just super impressive career and life story, and your relentless pursuit of just everything that you're putting yourself into. And you're a huge inspiration to many people. And I highly recommend for y'all who are watching this, follow Dean Stott on social media and all the things that he's doing. He's doing a lot of great stuff, positive stuff, and bringing a lot of that positivity from the military career that we've all left behind, thank God, but bringing the positive messages and life skills and life lessons into the work that you're doing. And so I highly recommend follow this wonderful guy. And brother, thank you so much for this interview, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.